If you would like to support the podcast, you can click the Buy Us a Coffee link on our show notes or on our website. Your support helps us keep the podcast going, and we appreciate each of our listeners so much.
You can also rate and review us on Apple and Spotify, follow us on social media, and don't forget to tell your friends and family about us. I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
John Walsh once said, "One missing child is one too many." Child abduction is every parent's worst nightmare. And here on Hard Times and True Crimes, we've given at least one example of the three most common types of child abduction. The ones by women who can't have children of their own and desperately want one, such as the Darcy Pierce case. Those by parents or family members. And this is one theory in the Charles Lindbergh case. The ones in which children are taken for ransom. The proposed motive of the Lindbergh case. Or for the physical exploitation and abuse, such as the disturbing story we told you about with the Wineville chicken coop murders. And it might surprise you to learn that most child abductions are not by strangers, but are by the non-custodial parent. And this by far accounts for most kidnappings and Amber Alerts. In fact, that number grows every year. However, the abduction of children by a stranger for the purpose of harming the child is relatively small, about 100 to 150 a year out of the 800,000 missing children cases. And if you listen to true crime podcasts, and I'm willing to bet you do, your perception of the crime is probably way larger than the actual risk, and that risk is held steady throughout the decades, being lower now than it was in the 70s. We're just way more aware of it now than we were then. Today we know that just 0.1% of missing person cases were considered as stereotypical stranger kidnapping. And statistics from as far back as 1976 revealed to us that even then just 3% of abducted children were taken by strangers. Yes, that's still too many. But what should probably concern us more is the 23% that were taken and killed by male acquaintances. Now that is an alarming statistic.
Darlene, this case that I'm getting ready to tell you about today, I know you're not totally unfamiliar with it. You do know, because it's actually still unfolding.
Yes.
There have been some recent updates in the case, which I will share with you at the end.
Okay.
And so I know you're not going to totally be surprised.
Right. But for the most part, I don't know much about it.
Yeah. And maybe some of our listeners haven't heard the most recent updates either.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump right in.
All right.
In the morning hours of August 15th, 1975, 8-year-old Gretchen Harrington started her walk to summer Bible camp. It was just a 10-minute walk from her house in the Marple Township, which was a suburb of Philadelphia. The walk took her straight up Lawrence Road, about a half a mile, to Trinity Chapel Christian Reformed Church. It was a walk she had made many times before, usually with her two older sisters, Zoe, 12, and Ann, 10. On this day, her two older sisters had stayed home because their mother had just given birth to the newest daughter in the family.
Oh.
Now, her name was Jessica. It was actually this very day that her mother and the baby had just gotten home from the hospital.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
so those older two girls stayed home, but Gretchen, she had a perfect attendance at Bible camp. She didn't want to mess that up. So instead of missing and messing up her little record, she was going to make the trek alone that morning.
So this was like a vacation Bible school.
Yeah, that's how I picture it. Here in the
Okay.
South, that's what we call it, but
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's similar.
Okay.
On this particular day, Gretchen had left her home around 9:20 a.m. Her father watched her leave and walk up the road until she was out of sight. And it was really just a couple of blocks to Trinity Chapel, but it was up a hill, and her walk would take her past 2 apartment developments and a Pathmark supermarket.
Okay. And I feel like at that time that wasn't uncommon for kids they kind of just I don't know. You lived your own life in the 70s.
Exactly. That was my next thing that I was going to say. You just hit right on that. Because I was going to say, in this day and time, it's almost unheard of to let your children walk anywhere alone, even in their own neighborhood sometimes. We have become more and more helicopter-like in our parenting. We have access to 24-hour news cycles, live streams of anything that happens, breaking news reports, and even Amber Alerts.
Right.
Right? And so we are much more aware of the dangers that are awaiting our children when they walk out the door. But in the 70s, it just wasn't that way. These days, the parent patrol, they'll call the police on you if they see your kid playing outside unsupervised.
Oh, yeah.
But in the 70s, kids, they walk to school, walk down the road, go to the store, the laundromat, library, ride their bikes everywhere. And we stayed out till dark.
Yeah.
We roamed the neighborhoods.
If you were thirsty, you drank right out of the water hose.
Exactly. When I was 7, one day I rode my bike to the library, and it was just a couple blocks from my house, but I did have to cross a busy highway.
Right.
And right when I was getting ready to cross, my mom was coming home from work, and she pulled up and saw me. She was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to the library." She said, "You can't do that by yourself." And I'm like, "Oh, I do this all the time."
Oh my gosh.
She was like, "You get home right now." So I guess that was a little much, but it never occurred to me I couldn't do that.
Well, all my friends would walk to the farm store, and my parents told me that I couldn't walk to the farm store with literally the whole neighborhood. And so one day they were gone, and I decided to go anyway.
Of course you did.
I got my behind tore up by my dad. Take that out, though, what I said about the water hose thing, because that made no sense for what we're talking about.
Well, I don't know. There was a level of danger. We were living on the edge, drinking out of that
what
hose.
I meant by that was like I never went inside. Like I stayed outside all the time. If I was thirsty, I didn't even go inside to get water. I just drank out of the hose.
And so most of our listeners probably have those same memories. We all did that in the 70s, right? It was just a free range then. And if there was a weirdo in the neighborhood, well, we all warned each other, stay away from that house.
Right.
You know, and then we just did our thing.
Yeah.
So you may be inclined to believe that crime is way worse now and abductions and murders are more prevalent, but that's actually not true. Statistics just don't play that out. It is just that we hear about them more. And typically, most of the time when we hear about them, most abductions take place by family members.
Right.
It's really uncommon for a stranger to abduct a child. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying if you look at the statistics of the number of people and the number of those crimes, that's actually statistically very low. At that Bible camp that Gretchen attended, the students would attend the first hour of Bible camp up at Trinity Chapel, and then they would be taken over to the Reformed Presbyterian Church for the remaining classes. And Gretchen's father was the minister at Reformed Presbyterian.
Okay.
And their house was like adjacent to the church building, like the parsonage. Well, we call it a parsonage. I think in that denomination, it's called a manse.
Oh, okay. Never heard that before.
I hadn't either. I had to look it up. That morning, when the students arrived at Reformed Presbyterian, around 11, some of Gretchen's friends had gone to the door of the manse, and her father realized she wasn't with them. So he checked the classrooms in his church, and she was nowhere to be found. He then phoned back over to the other church and spoke to their minister, Reverend David Zanstra. Reverend Zanstra, he checked with their teachers, and no one had seen her. She had never even arrived at the church. And, of course, fear set in.
Sure.
And Reverend Zanstra, he actually is the one who called the police to report her missing. And by this time, it was like 11, a little after 11, 11:23 to be exact. Police arranged an immediate search for the missing girl. Lots of volunteers within hours were out helping. During the search, tracking dogs picked up Gretchen's scent, but they lost it halfway up the hill to the church, which led officers to suspect she may have been picked up by a motorist. They caught that scent, and then it was just gone. Many of the children that day at the local pool and parks still remember hearing the whir of the helicopters that were searching for her. Although at the time they didn't know what it was going on, when they later found out, they remembered hearing that. Some of them said that still to this day, that haunts them.
Oh, I'm sure it was a big deal in that little town.
Oh, yes. Word of the disappearance spread quickly, and law enforcement was flooded, like I said, with volunteers who wanted to help search. The search actually included police from 2 townships, firemen from 8 townships, members of local JC clubs, parents of her schoolmates, and even some young boys who were used to traipsing around in those woods behind there.
Right.
And yet, after searching through thick underbrush, waist-high grass, ravines, woods, creeks for several square miles, there was just no sign of her. A 24-hour hotline was set up specifically for any tips or information that could lead to her whereabouts.
So police were really on this.
They were on it. That was on a Friday. The Monday morning headlines read, "Family waits, prays for missing girl, 8."
8 years old. Ugh.
That article went on to describe Gretchen. White female, 8 years old, 3 foot 6 inches tall, weighing between 50 and 60 pounds. Light brown hair, worn in braids, and blue eyes. It also described the clothing that she was last seen wearing. Blue and white short-sleeved striped shirt, dark blue shorts, and blue sneakers. Her second grade school photo was printed alongside, with the hope that someone saw something and would make a report. She was described by all of her friends as just so friendly and kind to everybody, just a sweet little girl.
Oh.
She was in the 2nd grade at the local Christian school. After the searches turned up no further clues, Police Superintendent Daniel Hennessy said at the time, "The only things we could hope for would be for someone who saw the girl to come forward. The investigation is headed in no specific direction." But like in most small towns, the church community showed up for the family. They showed up to comfort them during this nightmare that really was supposed to have been spent celebrating the birth of that new baby.
Oh my goodness, I forgot that
Yeah.
her mom just had a baby.
And instead, they're faced with the reality that one of their daughters is missing. Her mother, Ina Harrington, is quoted as saying, "I have raised my daughters to be careful." She said they were cautious, and she would never understand why her daughter would go with a stranger. She also said that police told them a pedophile had maybe been watching the girls all week.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. And I don't know, what made them say that to her, what
Yeah.
gave them that suspicion off the bat.
But they were suspicious of somebody?
Yes.
Specific? Okay.
At that point, no one's specific.
Oh, okay.
But they do hone in on somebody soon.
Okay.
The pastor of the church where Gretchen had been going to church camp and his wife, they carried on with their Bible camp that day. But later that evening, they went down to the Harringtons' house and took them a meal because,
Aw.
we do that.
Right.
Margie Zanstra described Gretchen's mother as being in a state of shock. It was Mrs. Zanstra's husband who had made that call, and their daughter Christy was a very close friend of Gretchen. And she even recalled the panic that ensued when they realized Gretchen was missing. I'm going to quote her. "I remember a sense of panic in the air. My parents looked very scared. At the time, I really think I lived under the assumption that she would come back. I mean, she's just a kid herself."
Yeah.
Margie Zanstra in her interview recalled a feeling of dread. She said, "I do remember not sleeping that night, and it was pouring rain, and I thought, this poor child is out there somewhere in the rain and cold."
Goodness.
She had gone missing on a Friday. That Sunday morning, the parishioners at Reformed Presbyterian fully expected to have a substitute preacher. No one imagined that Gretchen's father would be up to the task. But he did show up that morning, and he preached to his congregation about faith.
Wow.
Becoming choked up at times, he still shared a message of God's sovereign will. It was also on this Sunday that the search was called off, but with assurances by the police department that every effort would still be made to find Gretchen.
Let me just say that those Reformed believers, they do really trust in the sovereignty of God in a way that, like, I want to. Do you know what I'm
Yes.
saying? So that's something. And he probably needed to do that just to remind himself.
I'm sure he did. In the days following, many tips came in, but none that led anywhere. Police were actually going door to door, questioning people in the area, handing out pamphlets of her picture, flyers. They looked at employees of the Pathmark supermarket and their backgrounds because a lot of them didn't live in the area directly, so they checked into them. One tip that came in was from a witness who claimed to see a white car manufactured in the 50s in the nearby area that day. Another witness said they saw the little girl talking to someone in a green or possibly blue pickup or station wagon that day.
Okay.
So that was kind of vague.
Yeah.
Blue or green, pickup or station wagon.
Right.
But they weren't able to get any further information and track that down or anything. Then, October 14th, 1975, 2 months after the disappearance, a jogger who was a 24-year-old sailor from Philadelphia Naval Yard was running in Ridley State Park around 6 p.m. He spotted something. That something turned out to be the skeletal remains of a decomposing body.
Oh, goodness.
About 10 feet away from the body was a blue and white striped shirt and other items of clothing. The clothes were found folded in a neat pile, and her underwear were found hanging from a nearby tree branch like a flag.
That's weird.
Yeah, as if this is what they said at the time, as if they were trying to call attention to the area.
Yeah.
It was apparent that these were the remains of Gretchen Harrington, and while the body was not yet positively ID'd as her mother did identify and confirm that that was her daughter's blouse because she had actually made that blouse.
Oh, that just breaks my heart.
Doesn't it? 2 days later, the Delaware County Coroner's Office released the autopsy findings. The remains found in Ridley Park, approximately 8 miles from the Harringtons' home, were indeed the body of Gretchen, and she had died from multiple head injuries that fractured her skull. Other reports said it was 2 or more blows to the head. They could not determine if she had been sexually assaulted because of the amount of decomposition to the body at that time. They said it was more like skeletal remains, but they assumed she had been because, as Trooper Malcolm Murphy told the Delaware County Daily Times, there's no other purpose in killing a child if she's been abducted and killed.
Right.
So they had to assume that.
And especially because her underwear were hanging like a flag.
Now, there had been a string of disappearances and murders of young girls in that area leading up to and shortly after Gretchen's disappearance.
Oh, okay.
I know we said earlier that statistically that's unlikely for them to be abducted by somebody who's not a stranger. But sometimes, if you get a serial killer or something out of the ordinary, sometimes there are.
Yeah.
Investigators had a list of sex offenders that they were going by. They had read, now they didn't have a sex offender registry yet then, in the 70s. They would read through court records to get the list of sex offenders. And so they were working from one of those lists. And one in particular became very interesting to them. There's a man named Richard Bailey. He had a history of committing violent crimes against young girls. Officers did not officially ever name him as a suspect publicly, but he was definitely on their radar as a person of interest. They had interviewed one person who placed Bailey near Gretchen on Lawrence Road that day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In 1973, just 2 years before Gretchen went missing, Richard Bailey had been charged with kidnapping and raping a 9-year-old girl in Springfield.
Okay, so he was a good suspect.
He was a good suspect. Springfield's only like a 10-minute drive from the township where Gretchen lived. So it was very close proximity.
Yeah.
And that was not even his first arrest for such charges.
Wow.
2 years before that, in 1971, he had been arrested on similar charges. However, there just wasn't enough evidence in this instance to charge him.
Okay.
They needed physical evidence.
Yeah.
Later on, in 1976, he actually ended up pleading guilty to raping an 11-year-old Philadelphia girl.
Golly.
And in that, he was sentenced to 26 to 52 years in prison.
Okay. Well, good. So he's going away.
Yes. And you can see why officers are interested in him.
Definitely. I mean, yeah. He looks like a promising suspect.
On the day of Gretchen's kidnapping, Richard Bailey was tracked to being in the area, just 1 mile from where she disappeared. He was there for his job to pick up some lawn equipment. The manager of the store he was at noted that he seemed to be in a hurry. In addition to this, he had access to a blue 1970 pickup truck. Remember, one witness said either a blue or green truck
Yes.
or station wagon. They took that truck in for testing. And a dried weed was found in it that was similar or typical to the kind that was found in the area where Gretchen's body was found.
Okay.
But that's all still very circumstantial because
Yeah.
they can't actually say that that is where that truck was.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But one of Bailey's friends told police that after Gretchen's body was recovered, Bailey was wondering out loud how much evidence police would need to catch whoever did this. Well, that certainly sounds sus.
Suspicious. Yeah.
This friend also reported that Bailey had described the injuries that the girl had sustained.
Oh.
So he's sounding more and more guilty.
Yeah.
Then another man came forward with information. Now, this guy claimed to have seen Gretchen near a green pickup on the day she disappeared. So now he has narrowed his story down to a green pickup. Carl Williams was himself a parolee, so he had only recently gotten out of prison himself.
Okay.
He stated that he had been driving on Lawrence Road around the time she disappeared when he saw a green pickup truck pull over to the side of the road. He saw a girl with blondish pigtails, wearing a blue and white striped shirt, talking to someone in the truck. He did not see her get in the truck, though. And then he later went on to identify Richard Bailey as the driver when he was shown photographs of about a dozen people, and those photographs included Richard Bailey, and he identified him.
He picked him out?
He picked him out. Now, Williams also submitted to a polygraph test, which he passed.
Okay.
And when he was asked if he was the one who killed Gretchen, he answered no.
And he passed that.
And he passed that. He also said he didn't really want to get involved in this case because he was working when he witnessed that happen. And he didn't want his employer to know that he had just gotten out of prison. You know, he was kind of
Yeah.
keeping that on the DL.
He was probably trying to keep his job.
Yeah, and so he didn't really want to get involved and put himself out there, but he did see that, and he did approach the officers and tell them. He said the crimes in his background were nothing like that,
Okay.
so he wasn't really thinking he would turn into a suspect,
You're right.
but still, he didn't want to lose his job.
Yeah.
And if his account is true, that really would have been the actual eyewitness account of the last person to see Gretchen.
I mean, so far, he sounds incredible.
He did. He does sound credible, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Even with all of that, though, it was just not enough physical evidence to place Richard Bailey there. I mean, there was just nothing physical.
Right.
Their gut was telling them this is the guy. But you can't just go on a gut feeling.
No, you can't.
Police were still seeking additional forensic evidence, but they just couldn't find anything. Now, at some point later on, Bailey himself, when he was questioned about it, he said, "It sounds like me, but I don't remember that."
Oh, goodness. Okay.
And so some of those officers took that as a confession. They said,
Yeah.
"It sounds like a confession to me." While Bailey was the main suspect, this is kind of sad, but there's always talk among local people. And some people suspected Gretchen's father.
Oh.
Because unfortunately, sometimes it is the father.
Yeah, it is.
There was some talk about that because her dad did not have anything to do with it.
And that is sad, though, for the family. But
Yeah.
there's always, it seems like, these crazy rumors that come out
Right.
and these tragedies.
And that's an injustice to him because he is
Yeah.
already dealing with that loss. And then on top of that, has to know that he's like, people are acting like he may have done it.
It's sad.
And he's the pastor of a church.
Again, that's why you don't judge people based on how they're behaving in a tragedy. Because I'm sure some people probably didn't understand how he could get up there
And
and
preach.
preach after his daughter was missing. Yeah.
The case eventually starts to go cold. And it actually did remain that way for years. But that does not mean the police was not trying to find who did this.
Right.
They had not given up. And I'm going to give kudos to them. All through the years, they did not give up on this case. Over the years, as new detectives would come in and be hired by the department, new eyes would take a fresh look at the case to see if maybe there's something they saw that others had missed. Police Chief Grafe said, and this is a quote, "You just can never close a case until it's closed."
Yeah. Good policy.
This event changed the landscape of life in that little suburban neighborhood near Philadelphia. Parents no longer felt safe letting their children roam their little township. Locals have said that it was almost like a dividing line at times of before and after Gretchen. In a place where something like that never happens, it had happened. And they didn't know, they no longer trusted their neighbors.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They were now nervous about letting their children out of their sight. In October of 2022, a book is published called Marple's Gretchen Harrington Tragedy.
Okay.
Marple is the township she lived in. The authors are two locals who were children when the crime took place. They both grew up hearing about it, and their lives had directly been impacted by that before and after shift in life. Right? They became researchers, and they wrote a book about the local crime. It was really not any longer on the radar of people outside of Philadelphia, just the locals. It never left their minds.
Right.
But it had dropped off the radar of the outsiders. When they wrote this book, it brought some much needed attention to this case. And a lot of my information about Richard Bailey has come from that book.
Okay.
And several of the quotes I have read to you are from that book. So I will put that in my show notes. Now, while some people a lot of the people on the police force just believed Richard Bailey was their guy, there were some who were not so sure just because of the circumstantial evidence. Even though it seemed to point at him, some of them were still questioned, like maybe it wasn't him.
Those are good cops, because I feel like I would have probably honed in on him.
Oh, I mean, to me, he sounds guilty as can be.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm like, he did it. As I'm reading, I'm like, of course he did it.
Yeah, who else?
Right. Yeah. And he is now serving prison time, not now this minute, but during this, he was serving prison time for that 11-year-old that he raped. But it was while he was incarcerated at Laurel Highlands in Pennsylvania that he died November 4th, 2013, from natural causes at age 66. So if he was the guy, he died without confessing to it and without ever having enough evidence against him.
Okay.
Now, this book that I referenced, it did bring the case back into the forefront. And that case was still unsolved for almost 50 years. I think it was like 48 years until now.
Yes.
Now, I know you've heard about this. You've called me up and we've talked about it. Just last month, on July 24th, 2023, the Media, Pennsylvania District Attorney, Jack Stolzheimer, announced a break in the case. They have arrested somebody for the murder. They arrested 83-year-old David Zanstra for criminal homicide, murder of the first, murder of the second, and murder of the third degree, as well as kidnapping of a minor and possession of an instrument of crime in the death of Gretchen Harrington. Yes, I'm going to specify in case maybe some of the listeners didn't catch it. That was retired Reverend David Zanstra.
The one who called the police?
The one who called the police. The one who ran the church camp. He transported students from one church to the other during Bible camp in his station wagon. He was the one who presided over her funeral.
Golly. That is just evil.
It is. He helped search for her. He and his wife took food to the family that day that she went missing. They were there to comfort the family during, after the disappearance, and for years. I mean,
he had definitely inserted himself into the investigation. Right?
Yeah. This breaking news came from the DA's office. It was a special bulletin was put out on July 24th of this year. So that was just at the time of this recording, that was just a few weeks ago. So when they questioned him, at first, of course, he denied it.
Right.
But then investigators, they dropped a bombshell on him. Back in January of this year, they had interviewed an anonymous witness. The witness had been best friends with Zanstra's daughter back in the 70s. She had attended many sleepovers at their home.
Right.
She disclosed that during one such sleepover, when she was around 10, she had woken up to find Reverend Zanstra groping her groin area.
Oh, my goodness.
I know. It's just...
How brazen for people to do that and just think that the kids are not going to go home and tell their parents.
And that you're right, that they're going to get away with it.
And a lot of times they do, yeah.
Well, when this friend told the daughter what her dad had done, she replied, "He does that sometimes."
Oh my goodness. Are you serious?
I'm serious. This same witness also recalled that another student in her class at the time was almost kidnapped twice. She even had written about it in her diary. This diary, and this was dated in 1975, written by this, probably 10-year-old child. This is a quote from it. Holly was almost kidnapped twice. I think he might be the one who kidnapped Gretchen. I think it was Mr. Z.
Oh my gracious.
Yeah.
So did they have access to this journal?
Yes, she has given them the journal. When this witness's testimony was told to him, like this is what's been said by this person, he caved in and he confessed. He has confessed to it. Now, keep in mind that not all the detectives had believed Richard Bailey was the one. So when Zanstra confessed, it was shocking to the public.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, he just seems like from the surface, he just seems like such an unlikely suspect.
Right? Oh, it makes me sick. So it shocked the public. It didn't so much shock the police. There is word that they had been suspicious of him early on.
Really?
Now, I couldn't find a great deal of information about that yet.
Or about why?
Yeah. I do have one reason why. When he called to report her disappearance, apparently he was able to describe her clothing in very great detail when apparently he had not seen her that morning. She hadn't shown up.
Oh, that's weird.
Some were suspicious of him.
Yeah.
But it was never really followed up on. When they asked him and he said, no, I didn't see her, I don't think they followed up on that.
Or he was maybe able to say, well, I asked their parent. Maybe he was just able to
I'm
come
sure
up with
he was able to manipulate that situation. Yeah. Now, this is what his confession consisted of. He admitted that on the day she went missing, he had seen her walk into the church. He stopped and offered her a ride. Well, of course she took the ride. They were going to the same place. She knew him. It was her friend's dad. It's not a case of stranger danger.
Right. And this is not her pastor, but this is a pastor.
At a Bible camp that she's been to many times before. Her mom had said, I had taught my children to be careful. I can't believe she'd get in the car with a stranger.
Yeah.
But she didn't get in the car with a stranger. She knew him, which makes that all the more sad to me.
Yes.
She got into his green Rambler station wagon.
Oh, so witnesses did know what they were talking about.
Yeah, it was a green station wagon. He then drove her approximately 8 miles to a place, Ridley State Park. It was a state park, kind of close proximity. And there, he said he told her to remove her clothes. And when she refused, he hit her in the head with his fist, causing her to bleed. I'm thinking he must have hit her hard.
Yes. If he's even telling the truth, he may have hit her with
something else, maybe.
Yeah.
He said he assumed she was dead because he checked her pulse and he didn't think she was alive. So he tried to cover her body up with like some sticks and leaves and stuff. Okay. Well, then, of course, he fled the scene and then he turned up at church that morning just a short while later as if nothing had ever happened.
Whoa. What a monster.
What a monster.
I don't believe that, though. I believe he sexually assaulted her, and I don't believe he hit her with just his fist and killed her.
I don't think he did either. That press release from the DA's office that came out on July 24th, remember, they charged him with criminal homicide,
right?
Murder of the first, second, third degree. And one of the things, the wording, it says the possession of an instrument of crime.
Yes.
And I wondered what that was.
Yeah, do we know?
No, we do not know. Now, the details may very well come out in the coming days and weeks.
Okay.
But I was like, if he hit her with his fist, what's the instrument of crime? Is it his car because he put her in the car?
No, I don't think so. I doubt it.
I just
probably
don't know.
Something he hit her with or sexually assaulted her with.
Yeah. Well, she was bludgeoned with something. He says it was his fist, but that would have to be a really, really hard hit, I think.
I doubt he was that strong. I mean...
Well, he's 83 now, but back then he was like in his 30s, I guess.
You would really have to
hit somebody
very hard, though, to kill him, I would think.
I think so.
And I don't think if I hit somebody and knocked them out, I would automatically think, oh, they're dead.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
This book that I told you about, it was published before he was arrested.
Right.
It was published just last year in October of 22.
Okay.
And in that book, Reverend Zanstra and his wife Margie and their daughter Christy were all interviewed for that book. In hindsight, some of those quotes are like haunting. At one point, his wife Margie stated, After Gretchen disappeared, any car that came into the parking lot of the church, my daughter would come in and say, "Somebody's in the parking lot." I would run over and say, "What are you doing here?"
Wow.
She
Wow.
went on, not knowing it was her husband, or I'm assuming she didn't know. We're going to talk
Right.
about that here in a minute. She went on to say, "It changed my life too. For years, I'd worry about my kids walking alone and not coming home from school on time and that kind of thing."
Wow.
I'm just like, that was his wife.
That's so, well, I mean, he probably, like, we talk about master manipulators.
He would have to be really good. Because you didn't know who it was earlier, you may have not thought much about her quote before, but she was the one who said she couldn't help but think of her being out there all alone in the rain and the cold. Isn't that just
Yes.
horrible to think about now?
It is. Okay, so his daughter, so he was sexually assaulting his daughter?
According to that witness, that was her remark. Based on that, we can assume that he was.
Okay.
Now, his daughter has not come forth publicly to say that, but I
But probably.
believe very much, yes, he was.
Yeah.
Gretchen's friend, Christy, which was his daughter, she had described Gretchen as easygoing, friends with everyone, easy to get along with. Can you imagine how she must have felt when she heard her dad had been arrested for that crime?
No, I can't.
And do you think she ever suspected? Because
Maybe.
if he was molesting her,
But I think it would be very hard to admit to yourself. I think even, if somebody was molesting you, that's still different than murder
and
So it
kidnapping.
would still probably be hard to admit to yourself that your own father was capable of murder.
And plus, she was a child then.
Yeah. And if she had grown up being sexually assaulted or molested, by her dad, that may even have been normalized to her.
Possibly.
I mean, it's sad, but that.
Well, it almost
sometimes
sounds like it
happens.
was, because remember her replies was, sometimes he does that.
Yeah.
Now, I will say he had 3 daughters. So I don't know if he was molesting all of them or if there was one in particular. I don't know the extent of any of that.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you what I know at this point. Just 1 year after Gretchen's murder, the Zanstra family had moved on to Dallas, Texas.
That's interesting.
The Reverend had served at Trinity Chapel for 7 years. In the many years after that crime, and remember, nobody knows he's the one that did it yet.
Yeah.
He lived in Plano, Texas, and Marietta, Georgia, and a few other places, and continued to serve as a pastor for decades.
Oh my gosh.
So to me, there's no telling how many more victims, either of the sexual molestation or possibly even other murders. Who knows?
That is so sad. And he had the perfect position to be a predator.
And some people choose that position for that reason.
Yes.
Just like some people choose to be school teachers or
Right.
places in authority over children, daycare owners, and like you said, the pastor, whatever. People who
trusted.
they pick places of authority over children and where they are trusted. They do.
That's so sad.
And scout leaders and all of the
Right.
Mr. Zanstra now lives in Marietta, Georgia. Investigators traveled there to speak with him on July 17th. That's where they were able to get his confession. He was taken into custody in Georgia, denied bail, and is now fighting extradition to Pennsylvania. The DA's office has submitted a petition for requisition, which will be sent to the governor for approval, meaning they're wanting to, move him back there for the trial.
Right. How old is he?
83.
83, okay.
Once those requests have been approved, arrangements will be made to transport him back to Pennsylvania to answer for his crimes. District Attorney Jack Stolzheimer said, I'm quoting him, "We're going to bring him here to Delaware County. We're going to try him. We're going to convict him, and he's going to die in jail. Then he's going to have to find out what the God he professes to believe in holds for those who are evil to children."
Wow.
And I thought that is a great quote.
Yes, it is.
They did collect a DNA sample from him, and that's going to be sent to CODIS.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, they're going to compare it to DNA in open cases all across the country.
Because there are probably more victims.
I really believe there are. I think, like I said, this just happened a couple weeks ago. I think in the coming days and weeks, we're probably going to have to update this episode because I think more information is going to come to light.
Yeah. I mean, and who knows? He's lived in Texas. He's lived in Georgia.
So here are some other cases that they're kind of wondering if he might have had a part in.
Okay.
Amanda Campbell was 4 years old when she disappeared December 27th of 1991, and that was in Fairfield, California. Zanstra was living in that area and pastor at Fairfield Reformed Christian School in 1991. They're trying to look and see if there's any DNA that can possibly link him to her disappearance. Wendy Eaton was 15 years old. Back in 75, when Gretchen went missing, 3 months before that, Wendy went missing from Pennsylvania, same area, just a few months before. She also was actually on her way to a church function when she disappeared. And that's never been solved.
Okay.
So they're obviously looking
to his church
not his,
function? Okay.
but a church function.
Okay.
So they're definitely looking into him for possible that.
Yeah.
And there were others and more people on the internet, web sleuths, are coming up with like, what about this one? People are doing their research and they're finding out where he lived when, and they're looking to see missing people cases of young girls.
I seriously doubt she was the only one.
I don't think she was either.
Mm-mm.
And we know she wasn't the only one that he molested. So there may be some people who come forward and just say, I went to his church and he molested me. Hopefully people will come forward if that's the case.
Man, I just give that lady props for coming forward. I mean, she is the reason.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it's because the book was
was
published and it brought it back out to the forefront.
Yeah.
And maybe she saw that and realized
she needed to come forward. Wow. Because there can be a lot of shame kind of entwined with all that.
I will say this, just the fact that he's fighting the extradition to Pennsylvania, it tells me he's not remorseful.
No.
And one of the officers said that he just seemed like when he finally confessed it, a big weight had been lifted off of his shoulders. But I think that weight was the fact that he unburdened himself, but not if he was truly repentant and remorseful, he would face his consequences.
Yes.
He would say, yes, lock me up and throw away the key.
Yeah, he doesn't want to suffer for what he did.
Right. He doesn't want to face his consequences. He is purely horrible.
Yeah.
I don't want to end this note with just him. I want to end it with just saying again that everybody spoke highly of that little girl.
Yeah.
Her family were very well thought of in the community, and her father was a good pastor.
Yes.
Even on their church's website where he used to pastor, they gave a little write-up about what had happened. He had served at that church for several years.
Okay.
Once they gave the write-up, they at the very end, this is what the church website said. They have indeed endured a token of God's graciousness in the midst of great sorrow. Even through this grief, Reverend Harrington has continued to serve the Lord in the preaching of his word.
Wow.
He and his family remained active at Broom Hall until May of 1980. They return periodically when Reverend Harrington fulfills the pulpit during the pastor's absence. So he faithfully served that church until God called him elsewhere. And then he passed away November 16th of 2021.
So he did not get to see his daughter's killer brought to justice.
He did not. Unfortunately, he did not live to see that.
But that might have been harder for him to take, knowing who it was.
Maybe that was a mercy in not knowing that someone he considered a colleague and a friend was at his daughter's funeral.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a mercy that he didn't have to see that. Unfortunately, his daughters and Gretchen's sisters did have to see that, and they're still grappling with that as well.
Right.
The book that I referenced, they interviewed her as well, and you can read that to see where she's at with it.
Okay.
I didn't want to delve into that.
Yeah.
But when he passed away, her father, Harold Harrington, he was 94 years old.
Wow.
And his obituary was a very moving obituary of what a godly man he was. That is the story of little Gretchen Harrington.
Let me ask you a question. So about his wife and children, what are you thinking there?
I'm just thinking, I don't think they knew.
No, I feel bad for them.
I feel horrible for them.
Yeah.
I don't think if his wife had an inkling of that, she would have been interviewed for that book so recently.
No. And you're not going to stay with a child murderer.
And somebody molesting your children.
Right.
Your own
right.
children. So I think he was very good at hiding what he was doing. But apparently several of the little girls in the area were aware of it. I just think it's unfortunate because his daughters, I'm sure this has torn their family apart.
Oh, I'm sure.
it's come out publicly that one of them has made that statement as a child, that he does that sometimes, they're going to be questioned by police.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of things are going to be made public, and they're victims too.
Yeah, so he just unburdened himself and burdened his family is what happened. I mean, because he's in his 80s. He probably feels like, I need to get this off my chest. And and I'm glad, like, it's kind of a bittersweet thing. Like, on one hand, I'm glad because the case can be solved and her family can just know what happened. But I'm really sad for his family because, I feel like it's probably he confessed out of,
it does seem selfish.
Because of thinking of himself and his own self-interest or whatever.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. Again, that's just goes to show your sins don't just impact you. They affect everybody around you.
They do.
Your victims especially, but other people.
Yes.
It's never just a one person event.
Right. That's right. Those were some hard times.
They sure were.
There are all kinds of ways people like to listen to their Hard Times and True Crimes episodes. Some people like to listen in the car while they're traveling. Others like to listen at work or while they're running errands or doing chores around the house. Personally, I like to listen in the company of my wife, mostly because as soon as it's over, she's going to want me to give a short thesis on what I like best about her latest episode. But regardless of how you like to listen, you make sure you take the time to download every episode and tell everybody you know, and a few people you don't, to check out Hard Times and True Crimes. Till next time, goodbye.